He came to the K-9 rehabilitation center searching for a guide dog. What he found was a warning. At the end of a locked corridor stood the most dangerous retired police dog in the building, a German shepherd no one could control, no one could touch, and no one was allowed to adopt. They told him to keep walking, but the blind veteran stopped. When the dog sensed him, the violent barking suddenly went silent. Handlers froze. No one understood why, because the dog didn't see a threat. He recognized pain. And what happened next would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Winter pressed heavily against the K-9 Rehabilitation Center in rural Colorado, the cold seeping into concrete walls and metal corridors like a held breath that refused to release. Jack Reynolds stepped inside slowly, the soft rhythmic tap of his white cane echoing across the polished floor. At 45, his body still carried the disciplined strength of a former soldier, broad shoulders slightly stooped, not from weakness, but from years of carrying weight most people never saw. He wore a thick, dark brown leather jacket, old and creased with age, the surface rough beneath his fingers when he adjusted it. Beneath it, a red and navy flannel shirt added warmth. He barely felt paired with faded blue jeans worn thin at the knees, heavy leather boots built for cold terrain, and a gray wool scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. His beard was trimmed, but uneven salt threaded through dark stubble, and though his eyes no longer saw light, they remained steady, focused inward, as if always listening. The smell hit him before the sounds did. Disinfectant sharp enough to sting his sinuses. Cold metal. Damp fur. It told him exactly where he was. Jack paused just inside the entrance, breathing it in, grounding himself. He had survived explosions, firefights, and the long silence afterward when the world went dark forever. Yet standing here surrounded by barking dogs and unfamiliar echoes, his chest tightened with a different kind of fear. This was not a battlefield. There were no enemies to fight. Only the quiet emptiness that had followed him home. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," a woman's voice approached, calm and professional. "I'm Sarah Collins. I'll be assisting you today." Sarah Collins was in her late 30s, tall and lean, her posture straight from years of working with high-strung animals. Her hair was pulled into a practical chestnut ponytail, strands already slipping loose, and her skin carried the faint, weathered tan of someone who spent more time outdoors than behind a desk. Her voice was warm, but measured, shaped by a job that required patience and control. She had learned to read people quickly, especially the ones who carried damage quietly. "Just Jack," he replied, offering a small nod in her direction. Sarah smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Of course. We have several calm, well-trained German shepherds prepared for evaluation. Dogs suitable for guiding and companionship." Jack tightened his grip on the cane. "I'm not looking for perfect," he said quietly. "Just steady." Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gestured for him to follow. As they moved deeper into the facility, the sounds multiplied. Whines, excited barks, the scrape of claws on concrete. Jack listened carefully, separating the noises the way he once separated radio chatter during night patrols. Fear, anticipation, loneliness. Dogs hid nothing. They carried their emotions openly, and that honesty settled him. They passed handlers in yellow shirts moving briskly, all adults, all alert. One man in his early 30s with a stocky build and close-cropped hair nodded respectfully. Another, taller and thinner, avoided eye contact entirely, his tension obvious even without sight. Jack felt it in the air. Then it happened. A violent bark tore through the corridor, raw and explosive, rattling the steel doors, hard enough to vibrate the floor beneath Jack's boots. It wasn't just loud, it was fractured. Rage braided with grief. Jack stopped instantly, heart slamming against his ribs. Sarah froze. "Let's keep moving," she said quickly, her tone tightening. "That's one of our isolation kennels?" Jack tilted his head, listening. The barking surged again, deeper this time, followed by the sound of a heavy body slamming into metal. Pain lived inside that sound. Not aggression alone, but something wounded and desperate. His chest constricted. "What's wrong with him?" Jack asked. Sarah exhaled slowly. "That's Max. A retired police German Shepherd. Highly trained, extremely dangerous. He's not available for adoption." The word dangerous didn't land the way she expected. Jack had worn that label himself once. "Why is he isolated? He's unpredictable," she replied. "After his handler died on duty, Max became aggressive. He's attacked staff, bent kennel bars. We keep him separate for everyone's safety." Jack swallowed. The barking shifted uneven now, as if the dog had noticed something. Not the handlers. Him. The sound clawed at his memory, pulling up images he tried to bury. The explosion. The heat. The moment the world disappeared. Sarah gently guided him forward, but his feet wouldn't move. "He's hurting," Jack said under his breath. Sarah's jaw tightened. "With respect, Jack, that dog is dangerous. We shouldn't linger." They moved again, but the barking stopped abruptly. The silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears. The corridor seemed to narrow the air thick with tension. He sensed the dog listening, waiting. As they passed the isolation wing, Jack heard handlers whispering nearby. "Max went off again this morning," one murmured. "No one can get near him." Another replied, "He should have been put down months ago." Sarah cleared her throat sharply, silencing them. Jack slowed, turning slightly toward the kennel he could not see. His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of recognition rather than fear. "That bark," he said. It wasn't anger. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Jack took a breath. "That dog didn't lose control," he continued. "He lost someone." The corridor held its breath. Finally, Jack spoke the question that rose from somewhere deeper than logic. "That dog," he said, voice firm but gentle. "Who did he lose behind the steel bars?" Max went completely silent. Snow drifted lazily outside the narrow windows of the rehabilitation center, dulling the light and muting the world beyond the steel walls. Jack Reynolds stood near the edge of the isolation corridor, his gloved fingers resting lightly against the cold concrete wall. He could feel the space narrowing not physically, but emotionally. The air here was heavier, charged with tension and memory. Behind the steel bars to his right, Max paced in slow, uneven circles. Jack couldn't see him, but he could hear everything, the weight of each step, the scrape of claws against the floor, the shallow breaths that betrayed restraint rather than rage. This was not the sound of a predator waiting to strike. This was the sound of something holding itself together by force alone. Sarah Collins remained a few steps behind him. Tall and lean, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, she watched the dog with the cautious focus of someone who had learned the hard way not to trust appearances. Years working with damaged animals had etched a quiet wariness into her posture. Her chestnut hair was pulled back, but loose strands clung to her forehead, damp with stress rather than sweat. She had seen dogs break before. She had never seen one come back from it. "Jack?" she said carefully. "This is close enough." He nodded, acknowledging her concern, but didn't step away. The silence between the barks felt louder than the violence that had filled the corridor minutes earlier. Max had stopped pacing now. His breathing was rapid, uneven, but controlled as if he were bracing himself against something unseen. "You said he was a police dog," Jack murmured. Sarah hesitated, then sighed. "Denver Police Department, K-9 unit, one of the best they ever had." Her voice shifted as she spoke, losing its professional polish. Memory crept in. Max had not always been like this. Years earlier, he had been younger, broader through the chest, his black and tan coat, thick and glossy eyes, sharp and intelligent. At 5 years old, fully grown and powerfully built, he had carried himself with calm confidence rather than volatility. His partner had been Officer Ryan Miller. Ryan Miller had been 32 when he joined the K-9 unit, tall and athletic, with a narrow face, sharp cheekbones, and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow that no amount of regulation shaving could tame. His brown hair was always slightly too long, his uniform never perfectly pressed. He laughed, easily talked to his dog more than to people, and treated Max less like equipment and more like a living extension of himself. To Ryan, Max wasn't a weapon. He was family. They trained relentlessly, tracking suspects through alleys at night, detecting explosives in abandoned buildings, charging into spaces where hesitation meant death. Max trusted Ryan's voice above all else. Ryan trusted Max's instincts with his life. They moved together with wordless precision, two beings operating as one. Then came the warehouse. It had been a cold night similar to this one. Intelligence suggested a drug operation with possible explosives. The call came in fast. The team moved in faster. Ryan and Max were first through the side entrance. There was shouting, movement, and then the explosion. The blast killed Ryan instantly. Max survived. When officers tried to pull him away from Ryan's body, Max snapped. He lunged, teeth bared, refusing to leave. He stayed there, pressed against the broken form of the man who had been his entire world, until tranquilizers finally dragged him into unconsciousness. Something in him shattered that night. Whatever had once separated duty from devotion dissolved completely. After that, Max was never the same. He attacked 2 handlers. Sarah continued quietly, her gaze fixed on the kennel. Nearly broke one man's arm. Destroyed an evaluation room. He doesn't allow anyone within reach. Feeding him requires sedation and distance. Jack listened, his jaw tightening. Grief didn't care about species. Loss rewired the mind, hollowed it out, replaced logic with survival. And yet Jack said softly, "You kept him alive." Sarah nodded. Because before everything went wrong, he saved more lives than most officers ever will. The director believes that counts for something. Behind the bars, Max exhaled sharply, a sound almost like a restrained whine, before it was swallowed back down. His ears twitched. Jack felt it, the subtle shift in the air, like the dog was listening, not just to voices, but to meaning. Jack took a slow step forward. Sarah's shoulders tensed. "Jack, I'm not crossing any lines," he said calmly. "Just standing." Max stiffened. Jack could hear it instantly. The dog didn't charge. He didn't bark. His breathing quickened, then slowed again like someone fighting an internal command. Jack felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He knew that battle, the instinct to lash out, the effort it took not to. Max stood completely still now. Handlers gathered at the far end of the corridor, all adults, all alert. One was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with graying hair and a permanently furrowed brow. Another younger with nervous energy and restless hands. None of them spoke. They were waiting for the inevitable explosion of violence that never came. "What is he doing?" one whispered. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Jack tilted his head slightly, listening not just to sound, but to absence. "He's listening," he said, "not preparing." Max's breathing grew ragged for a moment, then steadied. His ears remained upright. His body did not advance, but it did not retreat either. He was suspended between past and present, between instinct and recognition. "This isn't how he reacts," Sarah said quietly, more to herself than to Jack. "He should be slamming the bars." Jack's voice was low, steady. Maybe for the first time he doesn't feel alone. The corridor remained frozen in disbelief. Max shifted his weight slightly, a single step forward, claws scraping softly against the concrete. No growl, no bark, just tension held on a razor's edge. Jack didn't move. He didn't reach out. He simply stood there, breathing evenly, offering no threat and no demand. For the first time in years, Max did not choose violence. Cold air lingered in the isolation wing, heavier than before, as if the building itself sensed the moment approaching. Jack Reynolds stood at the threshold of the kennel corridor, his white cane angled slightly outward, boots planted firmly on the concrete. Inside his chest, a familiar pressure built slowly, the same tightening he used to feel before stepping into hostile territory overseas. Fear was there, undeniable, but it no longer controlled him. At 45, Jack had learned the difference between danger and inevitability. His thick, dark brown leather jacket creaked softly as he shifted his weight, the worn hide bearing scars that mirrored his own. Beneath it, the red and navy flannel hugged his frame, carrying the faint scent of smoke and winter air that never seemed to leave him. His hands trembled not with weakness, but with restraint. Sarah Collins stood several feet behind him, tall and tense, her lean frame rigid with conflict. Her chestnut hair, pulled back into a loose ponytail, had begun to slip free again, and the pale lines around her eyes deepened with worry. Sarah was not a woman easily shaken. Years of managing unstable animals had hardened her instincts. Yet this moment unsettled her. She knew Max. She knew the damage he could do, and she knew she might be about to watch someone get hurt. "I don't recommend this," she said quietly, though her voice lacked authority now. "Once that door opens, there's no guarantee." Jack nodded once. "There never is." A senior handler approached a man in his late 40s with broad shoulders and weathered features, gray stubble lining his jaw. His name was Mark Bennett, a veteran of both law enforcement and the K-9 unit, his calm demeanor shaped by decades of containing chaos. He studied Jack for a long moment, then looked at Sarah. "If he lunges, we intervene immediately," he said. No hesitation. The lock disengaged with a metallic click that echoed down the corridor like a gunshot. The kennel door slid open slowly. Inside, Max stood frozen. The German Shepherd was massive up close, larger than most, his black and tan coat, thick and coarse, scarred in places where time and violence had left their mark. At 7 years old, he was past his physical prime, but still powerfully built muscles coiled tightly beneath his fur. His ears were pinned back, eyes sharp, and conflicted teeth bared in a low, warning growl that vibrated through his chest. His tail remained stiff, uncertain, not wagging, not raised. He was not charging. He was deciding. Jack stepped forward, once, then stopped. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to one knee. The leather of his jacket creaked again, loud in the silence. His knee touched the concrete cold, seeping through denim, grounding him. He placed his cane flat on the floor beside him, a deliberate act of vulnerability. His hands rested loosely on his thighs, fingers relaxed, palms open. Max's growl deepened. Sarah inhaled sharply. Mark's hand tightened around the tranquilizer pole. Jack didn't flinch. His heart thundered, but his breathing stayed controlled. He knew this posture. He had worn it himself after the war, the outward aggression masking an inward collapse. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice steady, unthreatening. I'm not here to take anything from you. Max took a step forward. The scrape of his claws against concrete sounded like thunder in the silence. Another step followed. His growl faltered, breaking unevenly as confusion crept in. He lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. The handlers remained frozen, every muscle taut, waiting for the inevitable snap that never came. Max leaned closer. He sniffed Jack's outstretched space, first cautiously, then with urgency. His nose brushed the leather jacket, lingering. His breathing changed immediately, sharp inhales pulling in more than scent, pulling memory. He moved closer, pressing his muzzle toward Jack's chest, toward the flannel beneath the jacket. Jack's breath caught. The smell of that shirt was old. Smoke, oil, winter, loss. It carried the residue of another life, another battlefield. Jack felt Max stiffen suddenly, the dog's body trembling as if struck by something unseen. A low, broken sound escaped Max's throat, not a growl, not a bark, but a wounded whine that tore through the room. Sarah's eyes widened. Max's massive head lowered slowly, carefully, until it rested against Jack's shoulder. The contact was gentle, reverent. Jack's hands shook as he lifted one slowly, fingers brushing the thick fur at Max's neck. He didn't grab. He didn't pull. He simply rested his hand there, feeling the heat, the tension, the life beneath it. Max trembled harder now, breath hitching, as if the weight of years had finally become too heavy to hold alone. In that moment, Jack understood. Max was not unstable. He was grieving. Trapped in the instant his world ended, just as Jack had been trapped in darkness when the explosion took his sight. Different bodies, same wound. I know, Jack whispered, his voice breaking for the first time. I know what it's like to lose your partner. Max pressed closer. Around them, no one moved. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, unprepared for the sight of the dog she had feared for so long, leaning into a blind man with absolute trust. Mark lowered the tranquilizer pole slowly, disbelief etched into his face. Jack exhaled a long, shuddering breath. He hadn't come here looking for this. He hadn't come to be brave. But as Max's weight settled against him, Jack realized something terrifying and profound. He wasn't afraid anymore, because this wasn't madness. It was recognition. Smoke reached the ceiling before anyone realized something was wrong, curling thick and gray through the upper vents, like a warning that came too late. Jack Reynolds felt it first in his lungs, the sharp bite of burning plastic and old insulation cutting through the familiar scent of disinfectant. The building shifted around him, no longer calm, no longer controlled. Alarms erupted overhead, their piercing screams slicing through the air, followed by the frantic echo of boots and shouted commands. Somewhere close, metal doors slammed shut as emergency protocols engaged. Sarah Collins reacted instantly. Her training kicked in before fear had time to surface. She grabbed Jack's arm, her grip firm, urgent. Fire in the east wing, she shouted over the alarms. We're evacuating now. Jack nodded, heart pounding. The noise blurred together, sirens' voices barking, dogs panicked and confused. He allowed himself to be guided toward the exit, his cane tapping faster now, searching for familiar ground. But then a single thought cut through the chaos like a blade. Max. Jack stopped short, the sudden halt nearly pulling Sarah off balance. The isolation wing, he said sharply. He's still in there. Sarah's face drained of color, her lean frame, stiffened eyes darting toward the corridor, already filling with smoke. Jack, no, she said, her voice cracking despite herself. That wing locks automatically. Fire crews are on the way. A handler ran past them, coughing, a younger man with soot already streaking his face. We can't reach the isolation kennels, he yelled. Doors are sealed. Jack's chest tightened painfully. The sound of Max's earlier whine echoed in his memory, raw and helpless. Abandonment was a language Jack knew too well. "I'm not leaving him," Jack said. Sarah shook her head, panic flashing across her features. "You can't see," she argued. "You'll get lost in the smoke." Jack turned toward the growing heat jaw, set blind eyes fixed on nothing and everything. "He can," he said quietly. Before she could grab him again, Jack pulled free and turned back toward the isolation wing. His boots struck the concrete with determination, cane tapping wildly, now useless against the roar of the fire. Smoke burned his throat, his lungs screaming with each breath, but he pushed forward, guided by memory and instinct rather than sight. Jack Sarah shouted after him, her voice swallowed by alarms. Inside the isolation wing, the air was thick and choking. Flames licked up the walls where wiring had ignited the crackle of fire, snapping like gunfire. Max was losing control. Smoke poured into his kennel, his massive body slamming against the steel door again and again, claws scraping desperately, barking not in aggression, but in terror. The sound tore through the corridor. Max Jack shouted into the darkness. A bark answered instantly, sharp and urgent, cutting through the chaos like a signal flare. Jack turned toward the sound, coughing violently as heat pressed against his skin. His cane struck a wall, then slid uselessly along it. He followed the vibration instead, the pounding of Max's body on metal guiding him closer. Each step felt like moving through a nightmare he couldn't wake from. "I'm here!" Jack gasped. "I'm coming!" Max barked again, louder this time, claws raking the door with renewed fury. He understood. Jack was close. Jack reached the kennel wall, his hand brushing blistering hot steel. The heat seared his palm and he cried out, jerking back instinctively. He wrapped his jacket sleeve around his hand and tried again, gripping the latch. It wouldn't budge. Smoke filled his lungs, his visionless eyes stinging as if they could still feel flame. Again he whispered hoarsely, more to himself than to the dog. One more time. Max hurled his weight against the door from the inside. The metal groaned. Jack pulled with everything he had left. The latch snapped. The door burst open and Max exploded out of the smoke, colliding with Jack hard enough to knock him off balance. They hit the floor together, Jack coughing violently as Max circled him frantically, whining, licking his face, pressing his body against Jack, as if checking piece by piece that he was real alive. "You found me," Jack rasped, fingers digging into thick fur. "Good boy." A beam collapsed nearby with a deafening crash, sending sparks flying. Max froze for half a second, ears snapping toward the sound, then acted. He pressed his body firmly against Jack's side, guiding him upright with practiced precision. The same instincts that had once cleared rooms and tracked suspects now focused on one purpose. "Get him out," Max barked, once sharp and commanding, then moved forward. Jack felt the dog's shoulder press into his leg, steering him away from falling debris. When Jack stumbled, Max braced him with his own weight, steady and unyielding. Heat roared behind them as flames consumed the ceiling they had just escaped. They moved together through the corridor, Jack trusting completely Max, navigating by memory, scent, and instinct. Every turn was deliberate, every pause calculated. The once feared dog had become Jack's eyes, his shield, his guide. "Keep going," Jack whispered, voice raw. "I'm with you." Max barked again, urging him forward. Suddenly, cool air hit Jack's face. The roar of the fire dulled behind them. Hands reached out strong arms, pulling them both through the exit as firefighters swarmed in. Jack collapsed to his knees, coughing violently as oxygen flooded his lungs. Max remained pressed against him, trembling, refusing to let anyone come between them. The building burned behind them, but they were out. together. Morning arrived quietly over the Colorado facility, pale winter light settling on charred walls and frozen ground like a fragile promise. Jack Reynolds stood just outside the temporary offices, the cold biting through his boots as he adjusted the gray wool scarf around his neck. The thick, dark brown leather jacket creaked softly as he moved, the familiar sound grounding him. Smoke still lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the scent of wet ash and disinfectant. But the chaos of the night before had passed. In its place was an uneasy stillness, the kind that followed disaster when the world paused to decide what came next. Max sat beside him. The German shepherd looked different in the morning light, still large, still powerful, but no longer coiled like a loaded spring. His black and tan coat was dusted with ash that hadn't yet been washed away. His ears relaxed, his breathing steady. At 7 years old, his face carried the quiet weight of experience, eyes dark and observant rather than wild. He stayed pressed close to Jack's leg, not guarding, not demanding, simply present. Every few moments his tail brushed the ground, once slow and deliberate, as if reassuring himself that this was real. Sarah Collins approached them from the office doorway, a folder tucked under her arm. In the daylight, the exhaustion on her face was impossible to miss. Her tall, lean frame seemed lighter somehow. The tension she usually carried loosened just enough to reveal the woman beneath the professional armor. Her chestnut hair was pulled back again, strands escaping freely now, and her skin was pale from a sleepless night spent coordinating reports and emergency responses. Yet, there was something new in her eyes when she looked at Max. Relief. Awe. "They've cleared him," she said softly, stopping a few steps away. "All behavioral flags. Everything." Jack tilted his head toward her voice. "That was fast." Sarah let out a small, breathless laugh. "Not really. What he did last night? No one's arguing anymore." She glanced at Max, who lifted his head slightly at the sound of her voice, then relaxed again. "They're rewriting his file. From scratch." Jack absorbed that quietly. He had learned long ago that paperwork could erase a person as easily as it could save them. He reached down, resting his hand on Max's broad head. The dog leaned into the touch, immediately, eyes closing for a brief moment of trust. Inside the office, Mark Bennett stood with 2 other staff members, all adults, all carrying the tired expressions of people who had seen something they would never forget. Mark's broad shoulders seemed heavier than before, his gray, stubbled face etched with contemplation rather than authority. He had spent his life enforcing boundaries. Today, he was dismantling one. "I've been doing this a long time," Mark said as Jack entered, his voice low and steady. "I've never seen a dog change like that. Not overnight, not ever." He cleared his throat. "You understand this won't be easy. He's not trained as a guide, not officially." Jack nodded. "Neither was I when I came back from war." The room fell silent. Sarah placed the folder gently into Jack's hands, guiding his fingers to the edge. "These are the adoption papers," she said. "You don't have to decide today." Jack didn't hesitate. "I already have." Max shifted closer, sensing the change in the air. His shoulder pressed firmly against Jack's knee, a grounding weight, familiar and steady. The signature was slow but deliberate. When it was done, Sarah exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for years. Outside, the parking lot crunched beneath their boots. Jack stepped forward with his cane tapping the ground ahead. Max moved instantly, aligning his body with Jack's stride shoulder, brushing Jack's leg with careful precision. It wasn't trained. It wasn't commanded. It was instinct. They walked together like that, awkward at first, then smoother with each step. Jack adjusted unconsciously, trusting the pressure against his leg. Max matched him attentive patient. When Jack hesitated at a curb, Max stopped blocking him gently until he felt the change in ground. Sarah watched from behind, hands clasped tightly at her chest. Tears slipped freely down her cheeks now. "He's guiding you," she whispered, disbelief and joy tangled together. Jack smiled, small and quiet. He's always known how. Weeks passed. Their world narrowed to simple routines. Morning walks through a nearby park, the crunch of frost underfoot. Training sessions built not on commands, but communication. Jack learned Max's signals. Max learned Jack's rhythms. The dog guided him around obstacles, waited when Jack paused, pressed close when crowds grew loud. At night, Max slept beside Jack's bed, his body angled protectively, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound until Jack's breathing deepened into sleep. Max no longer scanned rooms for threats. He scanned them for Jack. One afternoon, Sarah visited their small rented home. Max greeted her at the door, tail wagging in wide, unguarded arcs, the last traces of fear gone from his posture. She knelt easily, running her hands through his thick coat. "I can't believe this is the same dog," she said, laughing softly through tears. "He looks peaceful." "He is," Jack replied from the kitchen table. "He's working again." She looked at Jack, studying his face. The lines of tension softened his posture, less closed. "And you?" Jack considered the question carefully. "I don't feel lost anymore." Months later, they stood together at a small ceremony held by the Denver Police Department. Jack wore the same leather jacket, the same flannel, standing tall with his cane in hand. Max sat beside him, posture calm, eyes bright. Officers lined the room, many with hands clasped, some wiping at their eyes, as the chief spoke of service, loyalty, and resilience. "Max may be retired," the chief said, "but heroes don't stop being heroes." Applause filled the room. Jack rested his hand on Max's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. In that moment, surrounded by sound and warmth and recognition, the truth settled quietly inside him. He hadn't come to the K-9 center to be saved. He had come searching for a guide dog. But what he found was something far greater. Max had pulled him out of the darkness, and together they walked forward. Sometimes the miracle is not that the fire goes out, but that someone is willing to walk back into it. In a world that often feels broken, loud, and unforgiving, God still works quietly through wounded hearts, unlikely bonds, and moments of courage no one applauds. Jack did not regain his sight, and Max did not forget his pain. But God gave them something greater: purpose, companionship, and a way forward together. In our daily lives, we may never face burning buildings or life or death choices, but we all carry loss, fear, and unanswered prayers. This story reminds us that God sees those hidden battles. He places help beside us in forms we do not expect, and sometimes He uses us to be that help for someone else. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what it meant to you. Subscribe for more stories of faith and redemption. And may God bless and protect every one of you watching.